It's morning rush hour in Dongguan. Millions of people are flooding every corner of the city as they hurry to work. Li Zhongsheng is one of 6 million migrant workers who have settled here. Li arrived in Dongguan from his home city of Zhanjiang 13 years ago, seeking a better life. He has risen to the position of quality inspector at Shengyi Technology. The company is a global supplier of key components for circuit boards used in automobile electronics and communications devices. Li has first-hand knowledge of the hardship experienced by China's migrant workers.
In my first year in Dongguan, I started with a monthly pay of just 900 yuan, little more than $100. I still work 22 to 28 days a month.
The city of Dongguan lies close to Guangzhou, capital of Guangdong province in southern China. In the course of 3 decades of rapid development, Dongguan has become a global manufacturing hub, earning itself fame as the world's factory. According to official statistics, in 2017, there were over 410,000 registered enterprises in the city. 10% of the world's sneakers are made right here, along with 2 out of every 10 smartphones and a third of all toys. People here joke that a traffic jam in Dongguan will cause shortages around the world. Dongguan is feeding global consumers with a vast array of products, and many of these products end up in the United States.
Every day I make breakfast in my kitchen. We're going to go look at some of the products to see if they're made in China. So I always use this waffle maker to make waffles, like every day. So this waffle maker is made in China. Let's see the bowls. I use these bowls to mix up the batter for the waffles, so nope, this is made in China as well.
Mandelson is a vlogger living in San Francisco in the United States. He recently tried a challenge to see what his life would be like without any products made in China. He checked most of the items at his home and found that they are made in India, Vietnam, and mostly in China. He went to local stores including Ross and Costco in search of US-made products, and he found a similar situation.
China.
Mendelsohn eventually admitted that it's rather difficult for him to last without made in China.
If everything was taken away that was made in China, I'd be really in trouble. I mean, my phone, my laptop, my TV, everything is made from China. So everyday means of just talking to people, I couldn't even do that if we didn't have it.
Mendelsohn found that all the products for everyday use, including clothing and home appliances, are made outside the United States and mostly in China. But the traffic across the Pacific is a two-way street. U.S. products are also flooding the Chinese market. What Chinese consumers want from the U.S. are mostly high-end goods, such as cars, electronics, and name-brand articles for daily use. In recent years, imports of U.S. agricultural products have seen a sharp increase as well. So too has the demand for services, which account for an ever-expanding proportion of American exports to China. In particular, education opportunities in the U.S. are an area of interest for China's growing middle class. Zhu Yanan lives in Beijing. She is a longtime consumer of various U.S. products, including Hollywood films and electronics. She's also a regular visitor to the United States, taking along her 2 kids.
I've been taking my children to summer camps in America every year since they were 4 and 5 years old. And now they're 10 and 11. I love the educational climate there. I also take them traveling around the U.S. I love the American approach to education. The focus is not only on exams, but more on their all-round development.
In the past 9 years, China has been the #1 source of international students for U.S. universities. At any given time, over 350,000 young Chinese are studying in America. The United States is also a leading destination for Chinese tourists, 4 million of whom were welcomed there in 2017. Experts describe trade and economic ties between China and the U.S. as structurally complementary. Each country produces things the other needs. So how did this interdependence come about? Some argue that it all began when global corporates, with U.S. companies to the fore, embraced the outsourcing business model on a massive scale back in the 1980s.
They have made use of the fact that different countries have a different comparative advantage, and so it is economically efficient and economically useful to exploit those comparative advantages from different countries as you think about how to put together a car or an iPhone.
Mr. Kaus says that for the United States, the increasing emphasis on the technology and service sectors led to a lot of manufacturing jobs being outsourced, especially lower value-added ones. The beginning of this trend coincided with China's launch of the Reform and Opening Up policy. Drawing in foreign investment and boosting exports were the priorities for China at the time. Foreign companies, including U.S. ones, set up factories here in China, attracted by both the low labor costs and the huge market potential. Before long, China was experiencing a boom in custom manufacturing that used materials and designs supplied by foreign companies. As new factories sprang up, millions of migrant workers from rural areas flocked to cities like Dongguan in search of jobs. It was on their shoulders that the country was raised to its leading position in global manufacturing. Being at different stages of development, the United States and China are pursuing different development modes. As a result, they are a long way apart on the global value chain.
The United States basically is in charge of those processes like R&D, and they take those R&D, for example, results to places where the manufacturing costs are low, and China basically plays that kind of role of putting them together. And other developed countries, and the U.S. actually, they take those products and distribute it globally to other countries.
In the United States, the manufacturing sector is in a state of gradual decline as the economy completes the transition from manufacturing-based to technology, innovation, and service-oriented. The IT industry has become a major driver of economic growth and job creation. In the 1990s, when the U.S. experienced a period of sustained growth rarely seen since the Second World War, the so-called new economy flourished, driven by information technology and innovation. But under the Trump administration, the decline in manufacturing has been labeled an economic failure. Outsourcing has been blamed for a decline in employment, with China accused of stealing American jobs. The fact is that the contribution of manufacturing to GDP in the U.S. shrank to just 12% in 2016, while jobs created by manufacturing dropped to 9% of total employment. Yet, the overall economic situation shows that outsourcing has not hurt the U.S. economy, but instead boosted it. In 1991, growth in the U.S. was 4%, as the country enjoyed one of the longest periods of economic prosperity in its history. The unemployment rate fell from 7.4% in 1992 to 4.3% in 1998, the lowest in 3 decades. These figures point to the U.S.'s economic transition being a success, with outsourcing helping to make the economy stronger. Clearly, this was the right strategy, with new economic sectors creating jobs to make up for those lost by outsourcing manufacturing. As the U.S. economy has moved to the high end, China and other developing countries have picked up what the U.S. has left behind, namely low-end manufacturing. Trade experts say the two economies are highly complementary, with China's ability to produce meeting America's demand. Naturally, the structural difference also results in an imbalance in trade.
Americans have strong consumption power and the market is big. The American market has been the largest destination for Chinese exports since China joined the World Trade Organization. In a way, America is the major beneficiary of quality and inexpensive Chinese goods, and the major beneficiary of expanded Chinese exports. At the same time, however, this situation has also led to a trade surplus in favor of China.
According to the U.S. Commerce Department, in the nearly 20-year period from 1999 to 2017, the United States' negative trade balance with China grew from $68 billion to over $375 billion. Yet economists say the data is not definitive, pointing out that intermediate goods produced in other countries are not factored in.
Many of the products that enter the US, let's say made in China, would have many components that are actually made in other countries in those, right? If you use your iPhone or you use your laptop, there's a lot of input from other countries, including the US itself. And so if we try to adjust for those inputs from other countries, you'll find that the US trade deficit with China is not as big as the headline data says it is.
Take the iPhone X, for instance. The cost of all its components is $370 US. The panel from South Korea costs $110, and the chip from Japan, $44.50. China's final assemblers and battery suppliers earn just $14. The iPhone X retails at $999, which means that Apple, the brand owner, and its distributors rake in $620 per unit. To do the math of China-U.S. trade is to enter a minefield of complexities. For one thing, many of the foreign brands produced in China are also sold in China, a fact that is not calculated in U.S. statistics.
For U.S. companies, they invest in China, produce the goods, and export back to U.S. And also, they have the local sales, like a Ford. You know, they produce the car and they sell in China. So that's they gain the benefits of the ownership. So that if we calculate this not by the region, but by the ownership or by the nation, that the so-called trade imbalance will reduce dramatically.
There are other U.S. exports to China that are not included in the U.S. calculations, some because they are very difficult to quantify. These include services, software, tourism, education, food and beverages, as well as cultural products such as films, TV programs, music, and publications. In all these areas, China runs a deficit with the United States. For example, Hollywood films raked in some $3.4 billion in China in 2017, but Chinese box office films in the U.S. were negligible. Doing the math in a way that's more straightforward and true to the facts looks like this. Take 2017 as an example. U.S. statistics show its trade deficit with China stood at $375.2 billion. China, however, claims that the U.S. has overestimated that figure by around 26%, and that it's actually $275.8 billion. Neither figure includes the services trade. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, America enjoyed a service trade surplus with China in 2017, which surpassed some $38 billion. If we deduct this from the total figure, the U.S. deficit with China would go down to $237.8 billion. In 2017, 57% of China's trade surplus with the U.S. came from foreign invested enterprises, and nearly 60% from the processing of imported components. Some experts believe if these factors are taken into consideration, the U.S. trade deficit would be halved. So, the result of the math can never be definitive. However, the reality is the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China is much smaller than the U.S. statistics, or rather estimates, indicate. Moreover, the U.S. may have a trade deficit with China, but it enjoys a huge profit surplus as its economy is being complemented by China's low-cost labor, and the average American consumer is benefiting a lot from made-in-China products. It also means that while China made some hard-earned money from bilateral trade, the U.S. has taken away the larger chunk of the profits. Some analysts say a major and direct cause of the imbalance in bilateral trade is the high level of expenditure by American consumers and their government, who tend to spend most, if not more, than what they earn.
America is basically a deficit country, savings deficit country, because households don't save very much, and the government runs large budget deficits, and that means it will have a trade deficit. And that explains why America has had a trade deficit every year for 40 straight years. And this was the case whether China was a major power, whether the economy was doing well or badly, whether employment is good or bad, or whether the American economy is growing strongly or not growing strongly. Trade deficits are determined by savings rates.
Besides China, the United States also operates a large deficit with many other trading partners. Among them, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and South Korea. Experts say that if the U.S. reduced its trade deficit with China, it would increase its deficit with other countries since the demand is there.
But the mistake is, when fewer products come in from China, America will start to import products from other countries. It could be Singapore, it could be Bangladesh, it could be Europe, it could be Australia. America's trade deficit, overall trade deficit, will actually not fall at all. But the appearance of who is responsible will change. Will then be a South Korea problem, or an Australia problem, or a Germany problem, or India problem. But that's why the solution lies really within the United States itself.
Others believe it's China's high profile as an assembler and exporter that makes it vulnerable to finger-pointing.
China has a particular position in the global trading system which makes it vulnerable to criticism in the US, in Europe, but also increasingly in India. China is part of the Asian supply chains. A lot of products come together from other countries. China puts them together and then they are shipped to the US, to Europe and to India. And so China runs large surpluses, bilateral surpluses with the US, with Europe and with India, even though it runs bilateral deficits with other Asian countries and with some other countries.
Mr. Kaus also points out that if you look at the overall economic situation in China, the current account surplus is not particularly high, at just 1.3% of GDP in 2017. Now, how should China and the U.S., the world's two largest economies, deal with their trade imbalance? Experts are calling for cooler heads and trade talks.
What I'm hoping is that the two sides will get together and negotiate in good faith and resolve this before any of these tariffs are actually enacted.
Trade conflict in particular, if it escalated, could get both China and the U.S. doing things that, even though they don't make any sense, becomes very dangerous.
If a balance is to be achieved in the long term, the two sides need to find solutions within themselves. In the case of China, this may mean further measures to reduce import tariffs and open its markets.
We need a major shift in our trade policies as China enters a new era of opening up. We should focus more on increasing imports. This is one of the 4 measures announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Boao Forum for Asia this year. China will host an import expo in November this year in Shanghai. It's unprecedented for one country to invite foreigners to demonstrate their products on home soil and encourage its own consumers to buy these products. No other country has ever done this.
As for the U.S. side, it too should look internally for solutions to its economic problems. For the average American consumer, they have long been beneficiaries of imported products from all over the world.
What I think about the economy is that it's a very global economy. We're pretty much tightly connected, and it's very, very strong, very connected. And it seems like when one starts to take the other, the straightness starts to become and it kind of starts to collapse. And that's what I'm getting from this.
Mendoza says that he is already feeling the impact of trade frictions between the United States and other countries, and in particular with China.
I think that's happening right now. I think we're starting to see that with just food alone, just milk alone, it's starting to go up. I think I paid $5 for a gallon of milk. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, I see it happening already. Like, yeah, I'm not worried. It's already here. Like, it's like, how do we stop it from going up even more? It's kind of my big concern right now.
While America is turning to protectionism, across the Pacific, China is doing just the opposite. The Chinese government has been heeding a call from consumers for more quality choices in their daily lives. It has been steadily reducing import tariffs on its own initiative in the last few decades, and especially following the country's accession to the WTO in 2001. Just recently, China announced a reduction in import duties on more than 1,000 different types of goods, effective from July 1st, 2018. That list covers a wide range of consumer products, from washing machines to refrigerators, from shoes to cosmetics. Greater access to better quality imported goods will certainly be welcomed by Chinese consumers like Zhu Yanan.
I would love to see the tariffs go down. I'd buy durable goods such as a car when the tariffs are cut.
One area with obvious potential is trade in services. The service sector accounts for 70% of the U.S. economy, and the country is highly competitive globally in areas such as tourism, transport, and intellectual property. U.S. Commerce Department statistics show the service trade surplus with China has multiplied 30-fold in less than 20 years. Experts say they are confident that that trend will continue. Experts also argue that to achieve a better balance in China-U.S. trade, the U.S. needs to ease its restrictions on exports of high-tech products, which are in great demand among Chinese consumers. At the same time, America should welcome more investment from China, which would create jobs for U.S. workers. With the benefits of free trade and globalization clearly outweighing the drawbacks, there can be no excuse for trade protectionism. Experts argue that the real issue is how the benefits are distributed and what can be done to help those who miss out.
I like very much the Swedish model, which is very pro-globalization, very pro-trade, but then with a relatively active government that helps people from not losing out. And that is why, in my mind, in Sweden, you have very few people who are against globalization because the model works. Unfortunately, in the US, we haven't had the government helping people retrain and relocate and these kind of things, and therefore there is more resistance to globalization.
Trade balances are dynamic. They change with shifts in the economic situation bilaterally and globally. And despite the occasional outbreak of trade frictions, the global value chain is evolving to the benefit of more countries.
We see that, for instance, with the rise of China as a manufacturing nation and as a richer country over time, we see that this has implications for various other countries around China, where, for instance, some jobs are now leaving China, they're moving to other countries because it is too expensive to, put together textile or sneakers, sports shoes in China.
China now is also in an economic transition, from low-end to high-end production, from manufacturing to services and innovation, from promoting exports to boosting domestic demand, and from labor-intensive to technologically advanced. In Dongguan, Li Zhongsheng and his co-workers are living this change. Their factory has recently installed 2 automated production lines. The machines may be more efficient, but Li says they cannot replace all the human workers. Even so, he does have some concerns about his job. As Dongguan upgrades its economy, highly skilled and more educated workers will be in greater demand. Fewer and fewer laborers with basic knowledge and skills will be needed. The city's millions of migrant workers will need to upgrade themselves. At the same time, China must create more jobs in new sectors other than manufacturing. That's an economic law every country must follow.